town of the good, the bad, and the weird. You either live by the gun, or you die by the sword.
Welcome to the Good, the Bad, and the Weird MicroViews. I'm Nico.
And I'm Chris.
And it's another year of Nic Cage November. And this year we decided to do something a little different than what we normally do, I guess. It's a little bit one of his little bit more obscure movies.
Yes.
This year we decided, and a much earlier one on top of that. I could only find this one on VHS.
Yeah.
So we decided to do the lesser seen flick, The Boy in Blue.
And for me, a huge reason why I agreed to do this film was because when we started Nic Cage November, you brought it up that there are people out there that think Nic Cage is hot.
Mm-hmm.
And I have been on a quest to see what it is that others see. Because, like, you know, maybe not my taste, but I at least would like to understand the appeal. And I was hoping that The Boy in Blue would possibly give me some insight because, A, this is a younger Nic Cage.
Yeah.
This is a boyish Nic Cage role.
Yeah.
And he worked out very hard for this film. And so I think I might have caught a glimpse of what some people see in Nic Cage in this film.
Yeah, and that's one thing. Cage has always been in pretty good shape for the most part.
Yeah, which is surprising because, like, a lot of his roles don't really need it.
No.
But he's one of those people who thinks so far through a character that he's like, no, the National Treasure guy would definitely be ripped because he has to go cave spelunking sort of logic. And you're like, well, you're not wrong, but boy.
Yeah, and we also have to remember that this is Nicolas Cage's 8th role, if you also include Fast Times at Ridgemont High and the pilot for The Best of Times.
Which we, of course, are going to count.
Yes. But this is the era where, when they were trying to market Nic Cage, they were trying to market him as either the romantic character or the buddy of the main romance character.
And this movie did encompass both of those roles simultaneously. It was a little weird.
Yeah, just a bit.
So tell me about this film.
So, The Boy in Blue is a film about the 19th century sculler and Canadian icon Ned Hanlan, a legendary sculler who first mastered the sliding sled in about 300 races and with only a handful of losses. Kind of think of him as the Miyamoto Musashi of professional sculling.
Now, you keep saying sculling, like everyone knows what that is. For those of us from the Midwest, rowing. This man's a rower.
Yeah, the sport of sculling.
The sport of sculling, but we all know it much better as the little thin boats where one man sits in the middle and rows real fast.
Yeah.
As one critic says, this is a movie about a man who could put 2 sticks in the water faster than anybody else.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's pretty much any sport movie. But I was actually surprised. I brought this up to a couple of Canadian people I know.
Yeah.
And they know exactly who Ned Hanlan is.
Really?
Yeah.
That's impressive. I guess it's more popular there?
He's a Canadian icon. I guess when this movie came out, it didn't do as well in Canada where they were hoping it was, and people were also kind of a little pissy that they didn't choose a Canadian actor for a Canadian icon.
I can understand that. That does, especially because it's not like this is like, oh, we're hiring Nic Cage because it's Nic Cage. This is a fairly unknown actor at the point.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing Cage had been in at this point was Rumblefish, which was done by his uncle, so, like...
Yeah, like, even Birdie wasn't that much of, like, a showcasing.
Yeah, no, exactly. It's written by Douglas Bowie, who, funnily enough, his first movie that he wrote was The Girl in Blue. Completely unrelated, but I thought it was just kind of funny that had that. Directed by Charles Jarrett, it stars Nicolas Cage, Cynthia Dale, and Christopher Plummer.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a sports movie.
It is a sports movie, and as we know, I'm not normally a fan of a sports movie or a drama historical based on real life sort of thing, which this movie is all of those things.
Mm-hmm.
And reading through the critiques that came out when this movie did, honestly, most of the criticism was that this is a sports film about a relatively unpopular sport.
Yeah. Well,
and, like, that's not really a good criticism. So I did try to go into this movie with a very open mind and, like, try to enjoy it for what it is. And it's not, like, the worst film I've ever seen, but Ned just did not live a very exciting life.
No, like, the most excitement we have in this movie is in, like, the first, like, 5 minutes after they've tried to, how, like, they're trying to make sculling to make it out like it's the biggest sport ever to exist. Like, this used to captivate the rich and the poor back in the day. Like, really, really trying to sell sculling. So yes. I went into this movie blind, and I saw that, I'm like, oh, this is gonna be absolute bullshit. But, like, the only excitement is, like, 5 minutes of the movie.
Yeah, the other part that, like, I do think they did a good job, and then we, like, almost immediately throw it in the bucket, is the beginning of the movie introduces Ned as a smuggler, like a liquor smuggler, and that's why he's so proficient at rowing, is he's, like, the hillbilly NASCAR driver of the Canadian waters. And I was like, oh, damn, that's actually kind of cool. I could see how this would, like, play into him and his character more. And other than just a couple of rich guys calling him a pavo, like, nothing really happens because of him smuggling. In fact, like, the town, like, the only, like, honestly, the only real plot problem throughout the whole movie is at one point, the manager's group try to get him arrested for his past smuggling crimes.
And kind of hold it over him the rest of the movie, too, of, like, just remember, the only reason they haven't arrested you is, because I'm still protecting you.
And yet, constantly when we see the town, they're just, like, having a real good, like, hurrah, Ned's our man sort of moment, which is, like, that's fine, that's great, but it does kind of defeat the only tension in the movie, because Ned is such a good rower that you don't even have to worry about him losing half the time.
Yeah. Well, it's also kind of funny looking at it from at least our perspective. Granted, I mean, I didn't expect... I was thinking this movie was more modern, not starting in the 1870s.
Yeah.
But one, also, like, I don't think we've ever really gotten into, like, Canadian prohibition and, like, some of their conservative movements, because that's a big chunk of the first start of this movie. Because also, heaven forbid, he's having cheesy, fully clothed sex.
It was very cheesy and very fully clothed.
But
like,
tits were out.
Tits were out, not well displayed, but they were there. And, like, for cheesy sex scene, like, it wasn't just in for no reason. It had purpose in the story and plot. And, you know, it did help develop Ned and the girl a little more character-wise. But yeah,
Well, kind of, because, like, that girl is only in, like, the first 20 minutes of the movie,
and then the last 20.
Oh, yeah, she does kind of come back to him.
She does, well, because she marries the buddy.
Oh, yeah.
And that was something that Brian and I noticed, like, thankfully Brian watched this movie with me, because honestly, I wouldn't have been able to tell who anyone was. Because, boy, everybody looked the same in this movie.
I mean, they set her up so hard to be the love interest from the get-go, and then, like, immediately it's like, okay, I'm done with you, I'm on to the next hot thing, honey.
Yeah, and, like, if that had been a character flaw of Ned, and played into a little more, I think it would have been more interesting. But instead, the tension that I thought was going to happen, where we were going to have, like, this tension between old girlfriend, new girlfriend, and Ned, immediately dissolves because old girlfriend gets with old best friend / old manager.
Yeah.
And then when they like surprise announce to Ned, like, oh, we got married, Ned is the best friend. Is like, I'm so happy for you both, and like literally is so happy for them both. I kept waiting for Ned to like go drink in the corner and be like, my ex-girlfriend left me for my best friend. No, this man is legitimately happy for them both, has honestly moved on from this woman, which is great. Love to see it. But there's the only thing that I thought was going to keep this movie going. And, like, occasionally a character will drop in and be like, Ned, be careful. They're going to sabotage you. Well, but they don't.
Yeah, well, I mean, even the, once he moves on to higher society, because I think I was expecting that to be more of, like, the conflict of, oh, he's butting heads with the upper crust, but really he's this low and dirty commoner that's trying to be around them. And then, like, that romance doesn't really go anywhere either. And
I mean, it does. He marries her in the end.
I know,
but he marries her so suddenly.
Yeah, this movie is trying so hard to be both a romantic. It's trying to basically do with the Rocky formula,
yes,
but not in a successful manner because it bounces around between the love interest, and it takes too long to get to that love interest from the get-go.
Here's another huge problem with the movie. Is not just because there's so much plot-wise going around. This movie tries very hard with its dialogue and its story points to remind you that we are in an old-timey time of ye olde yesterday in Canada, which is fine. And the costuming is fairly good. You're on the river for most of this movie, so like that doesn't really help with the set.
Well, not even really. I mean, we get like... We got a couple little bit of races, but the race scenes only last like a couple minutes at most, or like maybe 5 minutes at most.
But like I'm getting at that, there's no architecture to really ground you in the stage. The costuming is good, but like the only ones who really wear costuming are the ladies, and we don't spend that much time with them. And Ned, not to complain too much, is shirtless for this whole movie, it seems like. Like, even the times he's wearing a shirt, he removes said shirt, and then other characters comment on said removal of shirt.
Yeah.
Which, like, I get it, he's buff, but at the same time, I would like to know when we are. There's no change in speech or in lexicon for this movie. It's not very well grounded in time. And the other thing, the music. Normally, I can get by with sport movie or period piece with the music just being whatever.
Yeah.
And for most part, the music is so whatever. There is only really 2 pieces that are, like, appropriate for the time period that this is in. And even those aren't, like, one of them's just the wedding march. So, like, meh. Like, there are pieces... They're fine, with the exception of one. And it plays several times throughout the film.
It's like the theme of the movie.
It is, unfortunately, the theme of the movie, which is upsetting because the other music chosen fits the movie much better. It's stylized. It's, period-appropriate music. And then there is essentially music that occasionally, legitimately sounds like you're about to break out into Flash. Whoa! Every time he starts rowing. But that's not the song that's playing. But it's the same style. It's the same... it is 80s excitement music. And it has no business being here.
Well, and we gotta remind people that this movie came out 2 years after Rocky. So, it's trying to have a Rocky theme or something whenever he's got that dun-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da.
But here's the difference between Rocky and this movie. Rocky was also set...
Yeah.
Much closer to the 80s.
Well, and also you had a grounding, like you said, of that's what it is. It's a character, because a lot of the background, like, I think it's easy to shove it off as like, oh, it's just another city. But sometimes that does matter, because like once you're out or if you have a movie that's set in the plains, make that the important part, but we're like you said, we're barely on the water. Like, we're just bouncing around most of this movie.
There's not, and like he mentions a few times where these important races are that he's participating in. 2 of them are in big places, like places that even nowadays people would know and recognize, and yet we don't show any of it. So I immediately forgot which races were which, because I was like, is this the... Where are we?
All we have to know is that, and like I think we only get like 3 full races. We get the one where he masters the sledge, the one where everyone else throws the race so that way they can make their money with it. Oh yeah, gotta remember there's gambling in this movie too, which is the big drive for most of it.
Yeah, but it's like very poorly explained and shown.
Yeah, and then like the next one, he's fighting the rival world champion Australian dude, and then has a rematch with him. Like it does. There's only 4 races, and they're all so short because the movie tries focus. It just has to constantly be going back to the romantic interest part that doesn't really do much for the movie. I mean, I get it. If the dude's life wasn't that interesting, you gotta spice it up somehow.
But here's the thing, though. Ned's life was somewhat interesting. This film just does a terrible job of showing the interesting parts. It barely shows him doing his running gig.
Mm-hmm.
It barely talks about his original love flings and how he was, like, the scum of the town. We brush over that so quickly.
Well,
It barely touches on this man's battle with alcoholism, which was a huge problem for him for his part of his career.
Yeah.
We only get a brief flash of him and his anger problems.
Yeah.
Like, this version of Ned is the driest version.
Yeah, because we do get one of his scratched out. There's like 5 races.
Yeah.
But we do get like that one little bit of like him dealing with the alcoholism of like he got super drunk because the woman he was supposed to be falling for, she was supposed to be falling for him, is actually engaged.
Yeah, which, like, sure, whatever, but, like, this movie does such a poor job of explaining who's doing what and why.
And part of that, too, is, like, there's not really even... Well, first off, I mean, in sports movies, yeah, if you still follow the formula, you can get a halfway decent sports movie.
Sure.
But with this one, there is no build-up. There's no real training. There's no real adversity. He's just naturally good at it from the get-go. We get, like, one little training montage, but all it is like, him doing push-ups and sit-ups, so it's, like, Saitama One Punch Man training to get good.
It really is Saitama One Punch training. But at the same time, like, he was doing his, like, training workout, and one of them is legit a gymnastics routine.
Yeah.
And, which is cool, and, like, would definitely build your shoulder strength. But as we were watching it, Brian goes, "The fuck is he doing?"
Yeah. Well, and on the other side, well, actually, in the vein with that too, is the Aussie who's supposed to be the rival.
Yeah, we barely see him.
Barely see him. There's not even, they have like 2 interactions maybe, and then also on top of that, the romantic rival, the dude he gets out of the or tries to get run over and make the girl fall for him. That's the only interaction they ever have.
Yeah,
like
throughout the whole movie.
Yeah, that dude's a nothing character. It's like, she could have been engaged. She could have not been engaged, and it wouldn't have changed the plot if she was like, "Oh, I'm only I don't really like you. I'm only interested because my dad told me to."
And here's the thing that really bothers me. For a fairly young and unknown cast, the acting's pretty good. It's not great, but it's passable. It's all decent.
Yeah.
It just, a lot of the problems come down to writing, which is unfortunate, because I do think a lot of these people's careers would have gone maybe a little differently if this movie had been written just a little bit more carefully.
Yeah.
Because this movie is very early in, and I'm going to pick Cage because we all know him best for his very stylized acting style, but, like, you can see the beginnings of, like, the personality and the styling that's coming through on all of these characters with everyone. Everyone delivers their lines really good. They are very passionate and very, like, involved in their roles. And yet, and at no point do any of them feel fake or hollow, but the plot is just kind of having big jumps and holes in it that just really aren't helping anyone.
Yeah, but I mean, you've got Christopher Plummer, who's been in a shit ton of stuff, and Cynthia Dale. I mean, she was in Moonstruck later on with Nicolas Cage as well.
Yeah.
Also, My Bloody Valentine.
Another good one.
Yeah, I mean, she's been in quite a bit. Their careers, I wouldn't say...
No, their careers did not suffer from this movie, but I do think that, like, this movie was so lackluster that it was not a good, like, early role.
No, not at all. And I mean, even then, like, I felt the acting was quite cheesy throughout most of it. Like, it just felt like it was trying too hard. Or a slightly bit old-timey here.
I agree. I agree from a complaint of someone who enjoys a more history, like, heavy version of movies. I enjoy when everyone has time and effort to go through and really, like, put in that work. And yes, their lines are delivered very cheesy, but they're delivered cheesy in kind of the same way a lot of sports movies' lines are delivered. So I'm not really too mad about it, especially because, like, this movie, for me, was barely a sports film. So it was nice to occasionally have some remembrance that there is supposed to be action happening.
Yeah, well, and I mean, I'm not a huge sports fan either. Generally, I end up liking the movies that are based around sports. Like, there is this Japanese flick called I Will Buy You,
Sure.
which is more, which, again, it's centered around sports, but the movie's about a dude trying to make a place for himself and his nephew. I can't remember his exact relation, but he's basically over this guy who's getting recruited by the pros. And think of Malcolm in the Middle getting recruited for the colleges kind of stuff.
Yeah, and while I don't love sports films, I have many family members who like this type of movie is right up their fucking jam. And so like during, Christmas and Thanksgiving, if we're not watching a specifically holiday themed film, this is usually the sort of thing that gets put on if it's not a World War II flick. So, like, I have seen just about all of the sports films at this point. And, like, this, sports-wise, it's missing a lot of the sport part, but part of that's just because the sport itself is fairly short.
Yeah.
Especially when this version of the sport was happening. I know it has evolved since, but, like, during this portion of the sport, there is not a lot happening.
Exactly. I mean, how do you make rowing interesting?
You can. I do think that is a possibility. I do think it is possible to make these lesser sports, or less popular sports, interesting. And I know that it's possible because of how many fucking sports animes there are.
True.
And how some of them are about the stupidest fucking sports or games to ever be played or put into anime format. And yet they're popular.
Hakuro no Go.
Yeah, that's it's chess. It's basically chess. Checker chess.
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah, so like, but yeah, it was, when it came out, wildly popular.
I only read it because I like Takashi Obata's artwork, so that's...
I had a whole group of friends who had no business reading it. None of us were into, like, board games even. And yet we all watched it and read it because the action was interesting, the dialogue was interesting. And yes, it was overdone and played, like, the actual, like, part of them playing the game is upped quite a bit, but part of that also was to make it long enough to be an anime. This is a movie, we can take out a lot of the silly.
Yeah, well, and I mean, even then, I can see where you'd go with that, but if you're trying to make them more realistic, because let's be honest, all these sports animes go way over the top.
They do, with the exception of a few.
Yeah.
And I think part of what would have made this more interesting was to have spent more time really developing Ned.
Yeah.
This movie's pacing is kind of weird. It cuts really far, but also not telling us how big of a time gap we're getting. So you don't know how long it takes from day one to the end of this movie.
Yeah, give us a race montage, not a training montage.
And if we do get a training montage, at least have some bits of what everyone else is doing too.
Yeah.
Because the lady friends are interesting people and interesting characters. Their actresses are good. Their costumes are entertaining, at least. Develop them. Let me know what they are up to.
Yeah. I mean, don't spend 20 minutes of the movie building up the one woman just to, like, ditch her.
And if we are going to ditch her, let us really ditch her. Like, it's clear that, like, everyone in this role was told what the direction was supposed to be, but the audience never is. And because of how this movie's cut together, it's really hard to feel emotions with this film.
I mean, honestly, I didn't think she was going to show back up after the one romp in the cabin together and him fleeing the law.
It was a little surprising to see her again.
Yeah, no, she is a good chunk of like I said, she's a good chunk of the movie until he moves on to the upper crust, and even then, like, it doesn't have that focus or that clear well division that, like, Rocky has.
Yes, and that is unfortunate because, and I think I agree with most of the reviews that came out with this. Everyone's complaint was mostly that this movie advertised and focused really hard on the sport aspect of the movie instead of the much more interesting part, which was the people.
Yeah, and I mean, just the way it ends too.
Oh, the ending is my favorite because it full on ends like an episode of, like, Seinfeld.
Yeah, well, the ending of this movie, for those who haven't seen it, it's very much this. He's gone back to it is the sports version of a girl getting into a cab. Where are you going? Home. he goes back to his roots, basically.
It almost plays sitcom music at the end.
Yeah.
That's how cheesy and it cuts, and it's a still frame image at the end where it just, like, stops filming.
Well, it's just a reuse of the beginning of, like, when he meets his friend / manager, he's like, you get the one on the left, you get the one on the right.
Which is cute. That's fine. But, like, this is not where we end the movie, because then the movie, like, holds that scene, that shot, for a sitcom level too long. And then we get a cute little double slide, telling us what Ned goes on to do later, which is fine, and I know is a standard for sport and historical based on movies. However, it goes on to explain how much other stuff Ned does, and I'm like, why couldn't we have included that?
Because you gotta hit everything. You gotta have the action for the men. You gotta have the romance for the women, like Gladiator.
Why instead of having a sitcom ending, why couldn't we have had a, like, fade to music, and then, like, while he's going on to continue to row, continuing to do cool, like, don't even tell me about it, just, like, show him rowing and then put the slideshow up. Yeah. But no, it just ends with him fisticuff scene in an alley.
It's just such a dumb little...
It is the worst writing.
This
is terrible writing. Which is unfortunate.
Yeah.
Because, like, this movie's not great, but it's also not bad. I managed to sit through all of it with some level of entertainment. Yeah. I did learn about Ned, the boy in blue. And my husband was mildly entertained by the constant use of the soundtrack to Flash. Whoa. So, like, it's not the worst movie I've ever seen. It's especially not the worst sports or historical based on sort of movie. But boy, the writing just really hurts it.
Yeah, and I think that's the issue. That is the biggest issue with this movie, is because it's so heavily on the romantic side of things. Mm-hmm. It has to shove all of that into the movie. And so it just tries to just go through the motions as quickly and as jaggedly as possible, just to get everything out there, and then boom, done.
And then I have one more thing to point out for everyone. It is not a complaint, because I understand that people grow and they change, and they choose to have dental work done. However, for those of you who are going into this without knowing what Nic Cage looked like when he was a young man, be warned. It is a little, like, he is undoubtedly young Nic Cage. And it's fine. Like, I can now see what people claim to have seen in him. However, I have gotten so used to Nic Cage's veneers, because they are very over the top. He got them very early in his career. Yeah. And so he has always had too much teeth, which is something that, for me, is a very distracting feature on actors. And it is something that is just part of acting world, I think, because a lot of them do this. However, this is pre-veneer Cage, and it will shock you at certain points if that is the sort of, like, if you go in thinking Cage, you're going to be like, who is this man?
I mean, I didn't pay too much attention to it.
It doesn't bother me for most of the movie, because Cage naturally does not smile with his teeth. Yeah. There are, like, 2 shots in this whole movie where Cage open-mouthed, big-teethed smile grins, and it is not who I thought it was going to be, because I'm so used to blazing white veneers.
Yeah, no, it's definitely an interesting role for him, to say the least. I mean, like we said, it is early on in his career. I mean, we're still a couple movies off from, like, something like Raising Arizona or Moonstruck. I mean, Moonstruck came out 2 years after this.
And by then he had veneers.
Yeah.
So, like, this is, like, he knew early on that he was getting veneers and was, like, almost, like, saving up the money from these movies to get them, which is fine and, like, not a big thing. However, Nic Cage's teeth have become such a big part, like, his eyebrows and his teeth are a huge part of what Nic Cage now looks like. Still has the eyebrows for this movie, but the smile is not Cage's, and it's a little jarring. It's not bad. It's not bad. Again, I understand. As someone who has had major dental work done, I understand. Yeah. But it is very much like looking at old photos and not realizing you're looking at your own self.
I don't know. I just see it as a younger Cage. I personally think he's aged like a very fine wine. I think he looks much better in his older roles than in his younger days, but...
I agree. I think a lot of this comes down to just, like, he looks like a little baby face man, because he is a little baby face man.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, he's pretty young in this movie. So.
He is.
But comes to the part of our micro-views. Rent, buy, stream, or decline that we ever watched it, despite having an audio recording of us watching it.
Yeah, this is a little bit of a hard one, because again, it's not a bad movie, but I also don't love it.
Yeah, I would say stream it if it ever comes to that. Again, this one's on a little bit of the harder side to find. I don't think it's very widely produced because it wasn't super successful to begin with, so...
No, I think you can probably get your hands on a digital copy to watch via, Amazon or the YouTube rental. No digital copies?
No. I had to buy this on VHS.
Oh boy.
Yeah,
so good luck getting a hold of it. But if you do find it, I would say watch it.
Yeah, it's not terrible, but it isn't great. It's just more of a melodrama than really a biopic in the way it plays out.
I agree with you. However, there is a caveat here.
Okay.
If you do find this, I wouldn't necessarily pass it up because of the movie it is. I would consider picking it up and having it specifically to have for a Cage collection.
Yes.
Because this, again, is a very interesting look at his early works. You can see the beginnings of his acting style and his characteristics, but you can also see very much where the Academy sort of teachings are still very much ingrained. He's still very stiff. From a, Cage perspective, from a normal person's perspective, maybe just stream it if you can.
Good point. I have to agree with that. I feel that way with a lot of his earlier works. It just falls into that kind of generic romantic comedy drama. Not even comedy, romantic drama flick.
I agree, but there are some very good, Cage-esque moments in this one to compare with. He has a few anger scenes. He has a few, over-the-top drunk scenes.
Yeah.
You can see the buildings of Cage as we know him.
Yeah. Exactly. But if you want to see Cage's cagiest, Vampire's Kiss. Or at least early on. So.
Early on, that is where he's broken out of the old thought ways. However, if you, like me, don't understand why people say they find Cage attractive, do watch this one because, again, he is shirtless through all of this, and he did all of his own sit-ups and stunts. So it is worth watching from that point of view.
That's a weird way to try and sell this movie, but all right.
But the movie itself also tries to sell it this way because the VHS copy that you gave me, the whole back is nothing but shirtless Cage, and then the alternate cover is also just shirtless Cage.
Yeah, I knew nothing about this movie, and I thought it was, when I originally bought it, I thought it was going to be a karate movie because it got, a headband on and everything, too.
And he's got, little dumbbells, and, it's just pecs oiled to the gods.
Yes. But anywho, this has been the Good, the Bad, and the Weird MicroViews.
Thanks for listening.
Peace. Thank you for stopping by this here town of the Good, the Bad, and the Weird. We appreciate your listenership, and if you want more of our takes in your life, feel free to check us out on social media at The Good, the Bad, and the Weird Podcast, or TGTBTW for short. As well, if we missed a fact, your favorite part of a movie, or just have a suggestion and want to reach out and say howdy, feel free to email us at tgtbtwpodcast@gmail.com. And feel free to join our Discord at The Good, the Bad, and the Weird Podcast, where we talk about movies, just share random banter here and there. And always, check out our podcasters, streamers, or any other content creator we shout out in our episodes. We really appreciate it. And as always, thank you for listening. Peace.